Hello, everybody, and welcome to another talk. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Emil Bewö-Lundblad. I hope I pronounced that right. I feel it was reasonably close. I'm sure you'll correct me if I got it wrong. Basically, I like just give a little bit of background before we start. How I know these people, why I've invited them on to speak. Emil popped up during a conversation I had with Ellen Jensen. I refer back to a previous video. You'll see it on this channel. I spoke to her about her work, and Emil popped up and she said, yes, he's a very, very interesting person. It would be great to speak to him. So we kind of corresponded a little bit via email, and I coerced him to come on and speak to us. He's actually got one thing I'd be particularly interested in is the thesis that you were exploring, looking at the different types of iris map, and you were doing comparative stuff, but we can get onto that. I think before we start, it's probably good if everybody gets a sense of who you are, how you got interested in this amazing topic, and just a little bit of general background. So over to you, Emil.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, I guess it started in college where I realized that there were different ways of looking at health, really. So I got into natural health through different, books and contacts, friends, and so on. And then I found the school in Sweden which said if you want to become what you would probably call natural doctor or natural therapist, they had quite a broad spectrum of courses which they combined into one study, so to speak. And I started there, and that's where I also find iridology, which has become my favorite, really. Mm-hmm. And just 3 years into my studies, Ellen was actually visiting Sweden to have coursework in iridology. And I thought, I've heard of her. I have heard of her father-in-law. This is something I really must go and listen to. So that's how I really started into this field, and this was in the early 2000s. So by now I've been practicing for roughly 20 years. Mm-hmm. And what amazes me still is that even though I've seen so many different irises and eyes, I always get awed by looking into the next one, seeing these colors, these structures, these shapes, and how unique they can be, and how much they can tell you, but also how beautiful they are.
I was going to say, principally, so you class yourself as a naturopathic doctor, so you're not is it more sort of herbal or homeopathic, or what's your kind of treating, what are you using?
Well, actually in this program that I went to, we had massage, chiropathic therapies. It included a bit of herbs, homeopathy, iridology also, more from the classical Swedish perspective, so to speak, and a lot about lifestyles in general, how to take care of yourself. So I've combined them since then. But I'd say that the iridology is the main analysis that I do, except for the actual talking to the client. And what I did was that at the same time as I went to this program, I also took the Biomedicine program at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, which is they joke and say if you want to become a lab rat, finding new cures and things, that's a program to study. But anyway, it gave me a deeper understanding of the human being, our tissues, the possible diseases that we could have. After those two programs, this was in 2006, 2007, I started my practice here in Sweden. And I just found that I wanted something more. And then I started looking around, where can I actually do a PhD thesis about iridology? And that was kind of tricky to find, because the asking around at universities, my main answer from them was, we do not have the competence to guide you through this field today. And that's when I found this university in the States, where I went and did my PhD, 2009 to 2014, because they said, okay, we know the people who can be your mentors, who can guide you through this.
I wouldn't particularly associate Sweden with sort of a sort of tradition of iridology, but is there some? I mean, I know obviously like you've got Liljeqvist, the famous iridologist, but is there a sort of a movement over there, or is there, not that I'd come across, but I'm sure you can go into more detail.
Well, it's always been waves of popularity, like I think in most countries, about traditional medicine and naturopathic medicine. So it's always been in kind of waves, but we also must remember that Sweden is quite a small country with today 11 million inhabitants, which means that if I say that we are many therapists, in another country that might be one city's number of therapists, for example.
Okay.
So that's why it's not as in great numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I traveled a little bit in the early sort of 2000s. I hadn't come across many. Oddly enough, the thing that I associate Sweden mostly with was more the kind of the RAID behavioral side, because of some of the connections that the RAID people in America, a lot of them are coming from Sweden, which surprised me a little bit. So, I kind of associate it more with that, but the traditional side, not so much. So is that something you've come across or worked with? Have you come across the sort of behavioral RAID models, where it's more kind of like
that? Not to that extent here in Sweden, more with my contacts abroad. Absolutely. Here in Sweden, I'd say that it's more on the classical side, where also a lot of the iridologists that were still active in the early 2000s, they were actually schooled in the 70s.
Right.
And a lot have happened since then. So that has also been criticized. And I think it's a bit sad, because every field develops, and so does its practitioners. But you can't really grade a science or an art from the practitioners if you don't know what kind of education they have and when they got it, and how much update they have had since.
So are you working with the more modern model of sort of constitutional type, so to speak? It's based more on a set constitution rather than physical changes.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So I've been schooled into that. I have read a lot of old literature as well, because I think it's like in every science. It's not that they were wrong a couple of decades or a couple of 100 years ago. They just didn't know as much as we do today. So some things we might say today, well, it was a bit hard or a bit too much to be telling, or the wrong vocabulary. But as far as they knew, that was their reality, their truth. Today we know more, so we can adjust for what we know today.
Yeah, I mean, I've been amazed in the sort of the photographic technology in the last 15 years. How I remember when I got sort of majorly into it around the sort of 2000s, digital cameras were just coming in. You had the 1 megapixel sort of Sony Mavitas or something, you actually put a floppy disk in it. Really hilarious. I mean, you've got modern phones now. I mean, I just updated my phone this week, and the video facility on it is like studio quality. I mean, it's just ridiculous, the technology that has advanced in that time. So are you working photographically with people, or are you still using the traditional light and loop?
No, I usually use my camera. I started that when I started my PhD studies, because I realized if I'm gonna also have even though my studies were about the actual maps, the actual charts, I realized that I need to be able to give examples of how this could look. And then I realized I really need a good setup with camera to be able to pinpoint these things that I want to show. So I usually do that. But of course, if I'm traveling, I'll do fine with a magnifying glass and a bit of light. But to be able to also record so that you can be looking back, like if they return 3 years later, you can actually look and see, well, do we see the same things? Has something changed or not? And if so, what could be the cause of that?
And what's the main sort of changes that you are seeing then? I mean, generally, I just see stuff like, so like, I mean, I call them Sora still. I get told off for saying Sora. It's a really bad word to use, but I just like the terminology. It's an old homeopathic terminology, but
Yes, yes.
kind of getting darker, more defined, larger. The arcus, the white ring forming around the eyes, the yellowing of sclera. But it's more like coloration changes. I mean, I've never photographed or seen any physical changes in the eye, but
No, I'd say that most of the changes that I do see are additions of coloring, so pigmentation, both to the sclera, but also pigments within the iris. What you sometimes also see is that you can see that depending on your overall status of health, the pupil can change in size, and then of course the rest of the iris will be affected by this. So what they in Sweden it was called healing lines in earlier days, and today if you look at it, well, if you look at the size of the pupil in different photographs, it can appear like a new line, but probably it's been there before. It's just that now the structure is visible. So I mean, the structures only change because of the pupil size. But if you look at, well, any thread, if you stretch it out, it will be straight. And if you go closer, it will crumble up. And I mean, the same thing will happen to your fibers in the iris.
yeah, I was liking it to sort of writing on a balloon, like sort of putting
Exactly.
as you blow it up, the letters gradually sort of distort.
Yeah, and that sometimes can also tell you something about the overall status. So, okay, why did that person 2 years ago have really small pupils and now they're really large, or they were large and now they're normal sized? So that could also, of course, give you a lot of information, but perhaps not because there's an actual structural change, but it does look different. And sometimes you might not have seen a sign, well, in the previous picture because it wasn't that clear, well, in that size, so to speak.
I mean, and then do you do any post processing as well? Are you bringing it into something like Photoshop, just tweak it or crop it down, anything like that, or is it just literally the raw images you're working with?
Always raw image. The only thing I might do is that if I don't get close enough, usually I do, but if I do it freehand without all the things around where you can put, the chin rest and everything, then I might just crop the picture so I don't have so much extra. But no other changes, no lights, contrast, nothing like that, because then I can't compare it the next time they come.
Yeah, I get a lot of. I post a lot of stuff on stuff like Instagram, and just kind of for fun, really, just to keep a conversation going. And I get so many people who will contact me, and they'll say, my friend did a bit of fasting, and now they had brown eyes, now they're blue, and then I always say, okay, so send me the photographs. Let's just have a look. I'm like anybody else. I'd love for it to be true. I want to see those pictures.
Yes.
I'm still waiting, and what I tend to get is I'll get an old Polaroid from the 1970s where you can just barely see the eye color, and then something taken on the smartphone the week before, and yes, it looks different. But you've got photographic considerations in there. There's technology differences, so it's not really a fair test. I'm yet to see anything where I've seen color disappear. I could be wrong, but have you seen anything like that where you've?
No, I'd say that the addition of color is what I see, but disappearing of color, the only thing that I might consider as a disappearance of a color, it's if you've been extremely ill. You might get but it's not a color, it's more a sense of a haze or a fog of white. It's like the eye isn't really clear, and then when they come back to health again, then that fog kind of disappears. But it's not a type of color. It's more a sense of, just like if you're out in strong wind, you get blurry sight because the eyes get watery. It's more that kind of blur that I'm talking about. But seeing like a brown pigment disappear, then I'm still waiting as well.
I'm forever hopeful. I'd love somebody to come in and say, look, literally my eyes were brown and now they're blue, but
Yeah,
nothing remotely like that.
and I'm not sure we should go there either. That's a little bit like should I tan and come home from my vacation brown? Well, that's just a fashion, right? Is it a fashion that it should be blue? Is that really better than the mixed eye or the hematogenic eye, or is it just different?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah, definitely.
And I'd say it's just different. You have to think about different things depending, but it's not better or worse.
I only say that really in regard to the model was always taught like that, wasn't it? I mean, it's the
Oh
Eurocentric
yes,
model of blue mixed and then brown, and the idea was that the adaptation of color was moving away from blue. But as we know, that's not actually true. I mean, most of the world's population haven't got blue eyes. It's a relatively small amount of people.
exactly, yeah.
So what about sort of generally people coming to see you? Are you seeing any kind of trends, more like tight structures, more like open structures? I mean, just general across the board. I know every iris is unique, but are you noticing any sort of like commonalities?
If I should mention something that has struck me and which I see different amounts of in different generations, because I think that is actually what tells you of trends, so to speak. And that would be the scurf rim, so a darkening of the seventh zone. Because I believe I see that much more in younger people today.
Mm-hmm.
And well, my hypothesis is, what do we actually bring into our body? What do we eat? What do we consume? How is the air that we consume? And what does that do to our, so to speak, cleaning organs and also our skin, which is also a way of getting rid of things that we should not keep in our body.
Mm.
And then if that one is more affected, then of course that might be something that, well, kind of trends then, if you like.
And how about like a overall density? I mean, I tend to find these days I see more what I call like the sort of lower density iris, not older generation, a lot more of the high density fiber, the sort of younger ones, maybe more, not always so, but just as a general, do you notice anything like that?
I can't say that I have. I've rather noticed that these neurogenic tight fibers, I find them a lot more within office workers
Mm-hmm.
with a tight schedule, lots of meetings. They usually come and they say, "Can we be done in half an hour? Is that possible?" And I'm trying to tell them, "Why are you here?"
Right.
Just to check it off your list, or to actually gain information,
Mm.
and to do something about your health. So
Mm.
I can't say I've seen that one, but it's an interesting thought. That in
I
mind.
just a general thing I just noticed. Maybe it's because we're all moving towards that state of we have to be sort of more hyperflexive these days. You have to be able to navigate and change quickly. There's so many changes in the world. It's almost like we've got to be sort of super flexible. And I've just like you say that those high density irises, there is less flexibility often.
Yeah, and also I must admit that those are often in their 40s or 50s or 60s.
Mm.
So there might be a truth in that as well,
Hmm.
because that's where I meet the so-called office people or the career people.
Are you using any other apart from the iris? Are you doing any kind of like facial diagnosis, like the shape or the hands or anything else you're using,
No,
or just the eye?
I don't do that as such,
Mhm.
but since I've come across that a lot during my years, I kind of include it without actually
Mm.
doing a proper analysis. But if I see something in the eye that I know is pointing towards a specific system,
Mm.
I might double check. Okay, so how's the facial signs? Are they telling me the same? Is there anything on the hands that could tell me that, okay, so this also tells me that I should ask about the lung capacity. So I do it, but not as a full analysis, more like confirmation of what the eye might might suggest.
Okay, so just moving on to your, I'd be very interested to hear more about your thesis. So perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about what was the inspiration for that? Why did you decide to go back and look at all of these iris maps? What was your sort of inspiration for doing that?
Well, I guess it started because I had this iridology course here in Sweden first through my program, and then I got one map for how to read the eye. And then I met Ellen, and of course I got her map about how to read the eye. And then through the years, I encountered more and more maps, and then of course I started Googling online or searching, and it just exploded with maps. And then it came to me that, okay, so of course the layout is different. The languages, one was in Chinese, I think. I don't read Chinese, but Chinese or Asian signs anyway. Another was in Russian. Then Ellen's in English, of course, and I've read those in German and in Swedish and so on. But I thought, okay, except for the language and the colors, are they actually alike or not? Because my question was, if I, since people travel a lot more now, and we also move a lot more around in the world, if I go see an iridologist or a Heilpraktiker, which the natural therapists are called in Germany, would they tell me the same thing as if I went to the UK or to the States or China? Would I still get the same results? And then I thought, well, number one is, do the maps actually show me the same thing? If I, as an iridologist, move and would, start using their map in Australia, for example, would I still find it, equal to the ones I've used before? And then I thought that, well, I can't just look at these. I need to try to do a proper analysis. So first I chose, with the help of my mentors, I chose 9 different charts. So represented were the States, Australia, Germany, Sweden, Russia, and a couple of others. I think there were 9 in total.
Were they historically the same time period, or were they older or newer?
No, actually they were from, I think the earliest one was in the 70s.
Okay.
And the latest one had just been revised the year before, so in like 2008 or something like that. So it's 3 or 4 decades, more or less. And so then what I did was that I used a quite basic Photoshop program, like something like that. And I just layered them. So 9 layers on top of each other. And then I decided that I would look at one reaction field at a time. And then, of course, came the problem, how many reaction fields should I look at? Because some charts have less than 10, some have more than 100. So I just said, well, I'll start off, with the appendix. It starts with an A, and then I'll just try to go through the body, every system that I can come to think of. And I actually ended up around 50. And then I looked at that one, and I took every layer and I marked it out in this 10th layer, so to speak, where I marked where is the reaction field represented on the chart. And when I had done so, I got a kind of a graph where you could show that, okay, so for this reaction field, in this particular area, which I colored then in 9 different colors, you can find that 9 charts agree that this area is the reaction field area for this specific, like the appendix, for example.
Yeah.
But the further out you come from this center of the area, so to speak, the fewer charts are still in agreement.
Oh, interesting.
So for each layer, they got a different color, which showed that, okay, if you go out to this part, then it's just 3 charts that agree. And here it's just 1. Okay. So, I mean, if I would say, what's the probability of finding a sign in the reaction field area regarding the appendix, well, then I would say that the highest probability is where all 9 charts agree. The lowest, where it's still plausible, is where only 1 chart agree. But in a different area completely, there's probably no no use of looking for that particular reaction field.
Mm.
So I did this for all the 50 areas, most of them for both eyes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Some, like the appendix, was only in the represented in the right one, and so on. And then from that model that I got, then I took these 50 per eye and put them on top of each other in this program to be able to give a whole new map, which then showed kind of a combined chart from these,
Right.
where the lines are not straight any longer, because it depended on, let's say, if I had two different reaction fields next to each other and they overlapped, then if this one has 3 reaction fields and this one has 2, then that one with the 3 would actually gain that area on the map, because that one was more probable to show that reaction field with 3 agreeing charts than the one with 2. In this case, what was a bit difficult was that all charts did not have exactly 50 reaction fields. Some charts even portrayed like an eye for the reaction field of an eye and a leg.
Oh yeah, they'll do like a little graphic, yeah.
Exactly, which is graphically a lot easier to learn if you're new to iridology. But it's not really that exact, because it's not made to be exact in position. It's made to be easy to understand where it is located.
I'd looked at a lot of the older ones are the ones that kind of intrigued me first of all, because I had a lot of those old books when I first started. So it's getting their sort of turn of the century. You've got Lane, Land, Lindblad, all the. So the images are pretty terrible because they're old books. I mean, a lot of them were hand done originally. So I in the end I redrew a lot of them. I actually put them into a graphics program and just redrew them all. And so for me it was very easy to lay up, because obviously the graphics were so tight and so clean. It was very easy to. And for the most part, I thought, comparing them with new maps, there wasn't really a huge difference in terms of what had been added, and the detail that of course the older maps don't have much in them, like Pexley's original one is very absent of positions, but the new ones, or the newer ones, they were pretty detailed, even compared by today's standards. So I was kind of fascinated by that. And of course they have weird, in some areas they'll assign to sort of things that we don't really consider anymore. They'll give a big area over to something that's not really shown prominently in a new map. So, but apart from those changes, it was pretty much there. It was interesting to see that even from the beginning, they were quite like what we are using today.
Yes, I would say so. If you look at the main, let's say 10, 15 reaction fields, if we talk about lungs, kidneys, liver, heart, and so on, I'd say that they kind of kept their site, their place for the reaction fields. They become more detailed, yes, but we can also talk about that. How detailed is good, because the more detailed it gets, it also depends. If I have an eye and I tilt it 1 degree, right?
Yeah.
Then if it's really detailed, that might put me in another reaction field. But if it's not as detailed, I'll still be in the same one.
Yeah.
So, and also what I did not fully develop in this study, because it was too much, it was the brain head area. Because in that area, depending on the map that I looked at, which I call the original maps, was that some portrayed physical aspects, some portrayed functions, and some portrayed feelings and mental abilities or disabilities. So it wasn't really comparable to say, well, that is that part of the brain, but you feel angry, and it's called because it wasn't always comparable as such. So that is something that I kind of left and said, this is for further studies, because it's just, that would be as long as the rest of the so to
I
speak.
know a lot of those old, particularly, I think it's even in the original Jensen map, he's got a lot of those. I think he's got a lot of that from those early maps from like people like
Yeah, and he actually took out, so he has an extra, I think they call it a brain flare, so that they took that out of the actual map and put it on the side so you can use either or.
zoom in and
Yeah, kind of like that, yes. No, so it was really interesting, and what I did find with this study, particularly, is that even though we talk a lot about minutes here, I don't know how you do it, but we refer to minutes, like 15 to 20 minutes. Look in this area for, and in general, those could differ. It could be 18 to 22, and the next one could be 20 to 23, or just 17 to 20 and 18 to 21. But it was really rare to see someone suddenly saying, no, 45 to 60. So even though it might be a bit of discrepancy between the maps, it wasn't a huge difference. And it's still, as you said in the early writings, head up, foot down, hands to the side, nose in the middle, things like that.
yeah, I mean, it's a good discipline, I think, just to go back and look at the maps, any maps, and just get a sense of how they've been developed. And like you say, there's so many graphic representations. Some are very colourful and pleasing to look at. Like Bill Caradonna did a really simple, he calls it the basic iridology map. So it's the basic,
Exactly. Yes.
simplified version, very easy to memorize quickly. And some of
And I think they have different purposes as well. If you want to have a really quick analysis, or if you're a beginner, start with a map with few areas, so that you learn and so that you can, get to the grand picture of it all. Then, if you need a not a proper but a more in-depth analysis, then perhaps you need one that is more detailed. On the other hand, as I said before, if it's really, really detailed, which a lot of the German maps are, which is fantastic, but then the tilting steps in straight away, that you need to be able to also remember, is this really in line, or is it tilted? And if it's tilted, what would it then show instead?
Yeah, I mean, my own preference is towards, I don't like boxed or regimented maps. I like it where positions kind of float. So there's a bit of space around the word. So I always say, if you go to an area and it's not quite that, you can try a little bit up and try a little bit down and see if it kind of fits. Because like you say, I don't see it as being absolutely rigid. And the eye is seldom circular anyway. So there's a little bit of...
Exactly. The eye isn't circular. And also, if you look at, if you would just take 100 people out in the street, do they look the same? Well, most of them have two eyes, one nose, one mouth, two legs, and so on. But one is round, one is tall, one is short, one is thin. So we are different. And then why shouldn't the representation of our body also be slightly different in the iris? So our maps will be static as long as they are on paper anyway. And they will also always be in a 2D print. And people are dynamic, and they come in at least 3D, if not more dimensions. So we need to remember that all these systems are flawed in that sense, that they are locked into these positions where we as humans or practitioners need to be able to look slightly outside of the box when needed. The difficult part is to know, when should I look slightly outside of the box and when should I not?
So what was the long and short of it all? So you did all this work, you did all these comparisons, you saw that overall they were fairly consistent. I mean, what was your kind of conclusion?
Well, my conclusion was that if just looking at the map analysis, you should be quite, safe going to different kinds of the world and going to iridologists and get the same kind of results. But since we are all different practitioners with different backgrounds, we will also interpret the signs we see differently
Mm.
because of what your own experience and also the techniques that you work with.
Mm.
So even though, let's say like this, if I have 5 signs pointed out in Sweden, a German iridologist should be able to see the same signs even though they have a different map. But they might choose only 2 of those and 3 other signs because they think it's of a higher importance.
Right.
So it's not a way of actually securing that it will be exactly the same, because it won't, since we are analyzing and we are all human beings. But at least the standardization, the system that we rely on, is close, if not exact. But also more studies are needed to look into depth on each reaction field to gain more knowledge. How much could the lung reaction field expand if this happened to be a 2-meter tall man weighing 120 kilograms and playing the trombone, which develops your lungs a lot? Should we actually include that into our map for that person or not?
Yeah, I mean, I'd spoken to a friend of mine in Germany he's kind of the general, a bit like yourself, general practitioner, I think, but he uses iridology as well. And he uses a lot of the German maps, and we were just looking, and he was sort of like a little bit concerned. I mean, some of the maps I was showing you, he said, "Oh, I always felt that the eye should be a little bit higher than that, or the ear should be a bit low." So, there is a little bit of flexibility in there. The way that these are being read is different, and also it might be a lot of it to do with the constitutional model as well. Because of the, say, a blue coming in, you're automatically thinking like lymph. So you're looking at certain areas and the eye might become more prominent. I mean, that, like you say, these are all things that are going through our minds, isn't it, when we're studying
Absolutely, they do. But what I also saw tendencies of was that in different parts of the world, especially those maps that came from a bit further away, I mean, Sweden and Germany are still really close together. If we compare it to, Russia is kind of close, but not the further part of it, and also Australia. And the question then is, does it also affect that we have had this isolation before in previous generations, so that there actually might be a difference if you are Russian, where you do have your reaction field for a specific system in the body? This will, of course, since we do move a lot more now, and we also we're not as strict with whom we marry and with whom we have kids. As well, I'm not saying that we always have had that opinion, but because we did not travel in the same way, we were more genetically alike during a lot of years than we are today. Will these also be kind of combined, and that it will actually be more alike, but that we are right now in kind of a transition between that? We might still have differences between if you've been born in Asia or in Europe or in Southern America. And I mean, these are small things, and but it's just like in if you talk about medicine and organ transplantation. It's if you have a very narrow genetics, it's easier to find within your own area. But on the other hand, if it's really narrow, you're more prone to get a disease than if it's the more mixed genetics. So I mean, there's never a better or worse, it's just different. But the question is, have these differences in the maps actually been created? Because it has been different. If we look 200 years back, it wasn't exactly the same in Hungary as in Sweden. And now these are kind of equaling out. And then also the maps need to kind of, get tweaked towards this more common ground, so to speak.
Yeah, I think even Von Pexley's map is quite similar to Liljequist, which are around the same kind of time.
Well, it is, but that is also because they do not have as many details, and as we all know, we all have hearts, we all have fingers and toes, and we are not that different, right? But we also do have differences because of where we have been living for centuries, because we have adapted to climate, to our environment, which we are not really in need of it today as we were before. But if you lived in Africa a couple of 100 years ago, that took then you had other needs for the body to be able to handle the heat and the sun than you do today. Same if you lived in the cold north, you needed also to be able to handle the cold, the dark period of the year. I mean, when we have winter here, we have 3 hours of sun. So we have adapted, and of course that is also something that might be possible to see in these maps that have been developed. But still, head up, feet down, 2 arms, that's still the same, right?
When I was doing a little bit of research for my book along, my background's kind of more like the Ayurvedic Indian system. That's what really fascinates me. But
Yes.
I found a whole section in sort of some of the older Indian classics where they talk about eye analysis, but they're using it in as much as the color. So what kind of a brown eye was it? Was it a very dark brown eye, almost black? Was it a kind of a lightish, tanny sort of brown, or was it like a greeny color? So they would assign those colors to the doshas, our old, like the human.
Yeah.
So they had that kind of, but there's nothing about that I could find to do with markings. They did, however, they spoke about you'd look in the patient's eye and you would look at the room being reflected in the eye, and you were looking for distortions, or you were looking for shapes, strange shapes that appeared in the eye that weren't in the room. So they put this down to sort of like sort of paranormal, like the eye was capturing something that we weren't able to see on a physical level. So they talk about those kind of distortions and abnormalities in the eye, but I couldn't see anything to do with individual markings. Likewise, in the Chinese system, the same kind of thing, but they were just assigning parts of the eye to different organs. So they would say, like the pupil was very much to do with the metal element, because it was always pulsating, like it had that kind of airy, changeable qualities, or the lung was the white of the eye. But again, nothing about specific markings, probably because they were dealing with brown-eyed people and very densely pigmented and hard to see surface details. But I found nothing that really looked like a map or spoke anything about a map.
No, but I think that the human have always been interested and fascinated by the eye. I mean, you can read it in the Bible. You can read about the eye. You found pictures in Egypt, several thousand years old, of the eye. So I think there's always been a fascination, and it's interesting that you mentioned the Chinese aspect and with the elements, because about 2 years ago I realized that, since I am also I have also studied acupuncture, and I use that in my clinic, in my practice. I realized that without even thinking about it, I've combined iridology with TCM almost on a daily basis, without really thinking about it. But so I took down some notes and realized, okay, so there's a system to this. So I actually looked at these the 5 elements, also regarding yin and yang, because if we do look at iridology, we have talked a lot in previous years anyway about the right eye representing something different than the left eye. And if you go also to behavioral iridology, you talk about the relations and the right eye signs and the left eye signs. So I did a couple of new maps according to in a combination of yin and yang and iridology, and then also the 5 elements and iridology. And it's really interesting to see how you can incorporate that into sections of the body and relate that to pulse diagnosis, and also see the common demeanor of these actually, and how they complement each other. So that was a lecture I gave at the Philippine Natural Conference about 1.5 years ago, about the iridology and yin and yang, and it's really interesting how much we can combine them. And hearing you talk about what you had found historically in China just confirms that they have had that same kind of thought of how the iris and the eye can help out also in their philosophical system of yin and yang. And sometimes I believe that when you start talking about yin and yang, at least I meet that a lot, that people go, oh, that's really different from my regular thoughts, and it feels a bit, hippie and 70s and new age, and I don't really know if I can listen to this. But usually if you go down to the basic and you just talk about, well, it's just another way, another language for saying the same thing. So you say a fever, they say a heat, they say fire. You say wind, they might say cold, and air, and just build it on, okay, so everything has got its opposite in nature.
Yeah.
Day has night, cold has warm, man and woman, and suddenly it becomes quite clear that it's not just a lot of philosophical strange words and thoughts. It's actually just another way of describing our surroundings and also, well, our own being, really.
Yeah, I find I find elements a really useful way of trying to deconstruct things. Look at particularly just categorizing herbs or tastes or even temperaments, even just using like air, fire, earth, water. They're really, really good to give you a sort of a basic understanding of what. So if, from a taste, you have a particular characteristic that person might display, and then one of the humors in the body might be exacerbated more easily, and then there's an organ that's attached to that, and quite often they turn out to be pretty accurate. It's a good model to base your.
Oh yes, absolutely. But also when you give suggestions of what to do to gain better health, if I then find that this person is primarily a fire element, okay, I know that what I give will be done in triplets, right? So then I can't go on to the toughest program straight away. I need to give a very short program because I know it will be done, and it will be done more than I tell them to. But instead, if I go to element metal, for example, if I feel that, okay, so here, this client is signing that it's a lot of metal element, right? Well, then I know that the resistance is quite hard, and that it will take time before they start. So it's better to have more contact with this one in the beginning until they start their journey for health. But also in relations, when people come and they talk about, oh, I can't understand how my husband always this or that, and then, or, well, I like a discussion, I like us to say what we feel. He always keeps quiet and just says, yes, fine. Well, he's fire. She wants to explain her feelings, right? But if he's water, he'll just go with the flow. And it doesn't mean that he cares less. It just means that he's fine with it. But sometimes when you can explain it with these few words, people really get that aha moment. Oh, so that's why he doesn't answer. Yes, it's not because he doesn't want to or that he doesn't care. He's just another element towards you. Yeah.
So what's your sort of latest project then? Have you got anything on the boil? Are you going to go back and maybe look at every iridology map and put them together? And, I mean, you can
Well,
extrapolate some amazing final map if you analyze 400 maps and got the absolute, the cream of all those 400 maps could be quite interesting.
that would be really interesting. What I would like to see that is how could we in the future use more technology. I mean, for me, it was a huge relief to know that you could photograph when I started, because my drawing skills aren't that good. So if I would have done what Nils Liljeqvist did with, I think it was 500 pictures before
I've
he
seen that.
felt ready,
Incredible.
I still wouldn't be an iridologist. So for me, the technology and being able to keep these for upcoming visits is tremendously perfect. So I would like us to be able to go forward with using technology as a help for us in the analysis. The problem with technology, though, is that it will only see and it will only analyze with what you code it with. So if you don't make the code good enough, the program won't be able to be good enough. And if, as I said earlier, if I tilt the picture 2 degrees before I put it into the program, it will tell me one thing, and then if I tilt it back 2 degrees, I will get a completely different list. Where perhaps I, as a human, could easily say, well, we also know that signs related to this system is usually larger than signs related to this system, so it's more probable that it's connected to the first one because of how the sign look. And of course, a computer program could do this as well, but only if I told it to.
I've been contacted by quite a few people actually asking about trying to put all these things together in a kind of an app. So an app that can scan the iris, has all the maps, has all the interpretations, and try and give you some. So I mean, it's been tried to lesser or greater degrees. I've never come across anything that really impressed me. But I was sort of wondering now, with the advent of more kind of like AI and people are using all these technologies to sort of analyze huge amounts of data and then come to some kind of a conclusion with it, whether we're going to see more of that. But like you say, they lose the intuitive quality of the human to human. You're seeing things that the machine is not going to.
Exactly. And that's why I say today, when because I'm also an instructor in iridology, so when I have new students, I say, if you're interested and if you really like these, they could be a good start. But don't rely on them to 100%. Use them as a kind of a colleague that might see things that you don't see, but discuss with it, so to speak, and still remember to analyze yourself and to dare to step outside of that if you think it's applicable.
I mean, it sounds like you've got there's a good base of information there to draw on, kind of your different influences, and having done a study like that as well gives you a tremendous advantage, I think, when you're teaching, because obviously it just shows a kind of richness and interest in the subject. You've gone into it to that degree and pulled that information out and found that out for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, since I did these 50 different areas, so around 100 maps, I also have maps where nothing is shown except for one area. And sometimes as a student, not having to look at 50 straight away, but actually, so this is the reaction area for the gallbladder, and only the gallbladder is graphically a lot easier.
And when you look at it, you're only talking about 10 or 12 millimeters across. So it's a very small.
Exactly. And that is also what I believe that technology has given us, because now we use these screens to project it at our slides, which means that I could have an eye of a diameter of 2 meters instead of only looking into the other student's eye, which is of course very valuable, but then you have to focus so much on these, as you said, 11 to 12 millimeters. A difficult task, though, is that we need to remember that all the computers and all the projectors have different color settings. And that I stumble upon quite a lot, where people say, isn't that an orange pigment? And I say, well, it's more a brown. And then when we look at a screen and then we change the settings for the screen, or we can change the projector, and suddenly they go, oh, okay, so that is brown.
Mm.
So that is also with technology, you need to rely on that the settings are the same.
Mm. Yeah, I'm amazed. Like I said, I just bought a new smartphone and I'm quite blown away by it. I'm not saying it's as good as an SLR, but it's a pretty damn good camera. The range, the dynamic range that those little lenses produce now by having stabilizers in them, and they're multi-layering it. I mean, it's quite incredible how it's moved on in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I mean the technique has just been speeding so rapidly right now. So I mean, what was new just 5 years ago is almost old today. And when I started having a camera with specific settings and specific lighting was really a wow thing, right? Not having a whole microscope or a lens with a flashlight. And today it's rather that they are getting old because they're big and bulky and difficult to bring, and our phones are really close today.
Yeah, another 5 years,
Yeah.
maybe.
I mean, that's a wonderful. It's a wonderful thing that we have that.
So, do you have your own iris map? Have you developed your own map that just?
Oh yes, I have. I have. So out of
Okay.
from this study, I did develop, because I thought, well, now I have everything. So why not develop a map of that?
Okay.
So I did. I think I could show you just from my book. See if I can. These are not aligned, so you will actually see 4 different.
Okay.
If we look at one of the pages, it will say R and L, so that's right and left, but they are on top of each other like this. And the other one then is dexter and sinister, because it's from the Latin.
Okay. Cool.
So what I did was that I wanted to keep the colors that I did for a zone map. And then I took the lines for different reaction fields then and added them. And those are all from the actual study of these 9 maps that I studied.
Okay. So can people get a copy of them? Do you sell a printed version of that? People wanted to use that map or are interested in looking at it?
Yes, I do. I do.
Okay.
So either in the book, but usually if you want to have it in your practice, it's easier to buy the actual map, because it's just 1 page and it's a bit thicker, so you can show it to your client, and it doesn't take so much space. And so I have it in Latin and English and Swedish.
Okay.
Of course, since I live here. So that, and I also do have these maps with the yin yang.
Okay.
And they are. I could show. Well, this is actually how it looks when you look at also that the left and right side.
Okay.
The yin and yang.
Okay.
Yang on the left and yin on the right then.
Okay.
But also where I did the specific, if you look at the organs and if they're yin or yang with the pulse diagnostics, and then we take all the other systems out of the context. So then the yellow is actually more like neutral parts of the body, and the red and blue then is of course yin and yang as well.
Okay, cool.
And here we can also see then that the nutritional zone, of course, are more yang organs, and well, vice versa.
So how do people go about, if people want to follow up what you're doing? I mean, it could be anywhere in the world, but if specifically in Sweden, maybe. How do people go about contacting you? What's the best way to get hold of you?
The best way is to visit my website,
Okay.
www.bewo.se. And there you can find my contact information and also read a little bit. At the time, it's in Swedish and English. It will be in Spanish within the year.
Okay.
I hold courses in Iridology 1 and 2 according to IIPA, the International Practitioners Organization.
Okay.
Iridology Practitioners Organization. And I hold them in Swedish and English. And this year, I'm actually launching it in Spanish as well.
Wow.
The Spanish will most probably be online.
Okay.
The Swedish ones I've had so far have been, so to speak, in-house, because the distances are so close.
Okay, so basically, if people, I mean, say somebody from America or Europe wanted to contact you, so you're doing it by Zoom, or you ask them to come to your class in Sweden and do one-to-one, or you will do distance learning?
No, we also do distance learning, yes.
Okay.
But usually then because you get a lot of having peers, right? So I usually say that if you're interested, I'll write you on a list. And when we get to a certain number that I feel like, okay, here's a group, then I hand out a date or a couple of dates where I say, this is the next coming.
Mm-hmm.
If you're still interested, if you do have time and it works with your own schedule, well, then you can, so to speak, register for that course.
Okay.
Because if we have these groups, the dialogues are much more interesting.
Mm.
And you can bring your own, set of questions and also your own experiences. And it usually builds a course that, even though the coursework in iridology is almost the same with just updates from the last year's conferences and new research, everyone is different, because sometimes, okay, suddenly there's a group from Norway joining, and they've just been in a zone therapy class, or taken healing, or so it always adds so much to the actual discussions around this.
Okay. And what about if people wanted to just come for a consultation or something like that? Do you do remote consultations, or is it better to come and see you in your practice? How do you work?
I always like the human contact meetings, but of course there's a distance problem here. You can't always do that.
Okay.
Sometimes when people contact me, I could go like, okay, so where are you at in the world? Am I going there in half a year anyway? Well, then we could, I can arrange to have an extra afternoon where I could meet people from the area. But if it's just not possible, Colombia to here, it wouldn't be practical. Then of course a meeting with Zoom or any kind of link would also work.
Okay.
But then usually the difficulty in that is that then I can't take the pictures.
Right.
So then you need to be able to have that quality so that we could actually do it. So then if we do a digital meeting, then I usually require the pictures beforehand, so I can see that the quality is sufficient so that we could actually gain anything from it.
So better to contact you first through the website maybe and just say, listen, this is what I've got, and then you go.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise, if we meet and then we have a whole meeting planned and we realize, okay, the quality is sadly too poor, there's no time to retake them there and then.
Okay. So when we go through an edit, I'll put up the address. People can get in contact with you. Anything else, like a YouTube channel or a Facebook channel or social media? Do you do any of that stuff, or is that maybe not so?
Mainly not. Sometimes, but then I usually do that in ads, or I put it on my website that there's a new thing coming as such. But there's a bit too much focus, or well, not too much, I guess, but on the actual coursework, and right now then in translating everything into Spanish.
Wow. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Well, listen, thank you very much, Emil. Thank you for coming on, speaking to us. It's been great to catch up with you and hear about. I'm very interested in the study. That was really fascinating for me as well. So I'll put this up, and then hopefully people will get in contact with you if they've got any questions. So yeah, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.